can be successful. And most important thing is to be a good, nowadays, you have to be a good Varroa manager. I am of the generation that kept bees prior to Varroa coming to this country, and I just so happened to be the person that found the first Varroa mite infestation in the state of New Jersey in 1990. And I've been battling them ever since then. So that's what our nemesis looks like. A small parasitic mite about the size of a deer tick, feeds on the honeybee's hemolymph and bee blood, spreads viruses just like ticks spread viruses to mammals, and causes a huge problem within the beekeeping world. You know, there's a conflict going on here because of Varroa mite, which is a foreign invader. It wants to live and wants to reproduce. The beekeeper, us, we want to keep healthy hives that produce a honey crop, that produce nucleuses, that just thrive in our environment. And Varroa constantly are changing to survive the control that we apply to keep their numbers in check. In the beekeeping world, there's no new treatments coming down the pike. We have to live with what we have. And as I already said, Varroa makes viruses. And I don't know about these viruses, but we do know that when our mite levels are kept low, viruses are not really a problem. When our mite levels are allowed to get high and viruses start to circulate through our colonies, it takes a long time for those viruses to circulate out, even after we've controlled the Varroa mite. So, for example, you got high mite levels and you have viruses in your colonies. You can put a control on that will lower your mite levels down, but the viruses are still there, and it takes a long time for them to cycle out. I mean 3, 4, 6 months. So that's why it's important that you don't let virus levels or your levels. People will say, well, why be concerned about Varroa? I don't see them. You know, I never thought I had a problem. They will kill your hive. They will increase your overwinter losses. And it was very common when I was the state apiarist to have people call me up and say, hey, Tim, my bees are dead in January or February. I think they starved to death. You go out there and look, and what happened was, they were dead head first in the cells. There was plenty of honey an inch away from where the cluster was, and the cluster was less than the size of your fist. And I guess technically they did starve to death because there were not enough bees to move to where the honey was. And the reason there wasn't enough bees is because their longevity of their lifespan was significantly decreased by the viruses that the Varroa mites had spread to them. So that's why you need to be concerned about this parasitic problem. Detection methods for monitoring what your levels are. I'll be the first to admit that no detection or monitoring method is really the best, because you're only monitoring a small percentage of the bees in your hive. And I've done them all over the years, and I've seen them come and go. And in my opinion, the most accurate one and the most less likely to be messed up by the beekeeper is the alcohol wash. The reason I recommend it is because it allows us to compare apples to apples, and it is the least likely one to be done incorrectly. When should this be done? Pretty much monthly after June and before treatment to determine what your levels are before you apply a control, and then 3 weeks after the treatment is completed to try to determine what the effect was. Many times people would tell me, Tim, I'm going to treat anyway. Why do I have to know what the level is before I apply a treatment? And the reason is all of these treatments do not work all that great. And in order to know if whatever you applied had any effect, you have to know what you were starting with. And, you know, if you want any input or advice from me, the only way to have that input or advice from me is to be able to give me what were your mite levels before you treated, what were your mite levels 3 weeks after you treated, and then I would be able to have a conversation with you about what you did and what the effect was, and if the effect was no good, what might have been the reasons it was no good. So it's very, very important to do that, okay? So people would say to me, I don't have them, I never saw them. Everybody has Varroa to one degree or another. Every beekeeper has them. Every hive has them. Even colonies that you wash consistently zeros, where you get no mites in your alcohol wash, still have mites. They're just below a detectable level. And that's really the level we want to keep them at, okay? Below a detectable level. First-year packages and swarms can have high mite levels. Nukes can have high levels. When I was a state apiarist, I encouraged people selling nucleuses to sell them with Apivar strips in for treatment, so that they had the lowest levels they could have before a new beekeeper got them under their management. Okay, you usually won't see Varroa on adult bees until it's too late. When you start seeing them on adult bees, that means you have a pretty high infestation level. If any of you people come from a farm background, once you see a rat, you have 40 of them you didn't see, and they reproduce like crazy. Same thing with a roach. You start seeing roaches in the daylight, you got a big fat problem, because there's millions of them that come out in the nighttime. So Varroa are the same way. Everyone has them. Nukes can have high levels. You don't see them on adult bees until it's too late. So you got to stay on top of this, guys. This is just a simplified bee and mite population. Justin, can you see my cursor if I move it over the slide or no?
No.
Okay, that's fine. So this just shows you that as the population of the bees increase, the mite population is increasing as well. And once we get into that July, late June, early July time period, like where we're at right now, our adult population of bees starts to decline. But our mite population actually will keep on going. I mean, it'll decline somewhat as the bees decline, but it's still way too high for survivability. Here you can see a Varroa mite on a bee. They generally don't like to get up on the top part of the bee. They like to get on their belly. A young man from the University of Maryland or the Bee Informed Partnership figured all that out, where they feed and how they feed, which was very, very interesting. They like those softer belly fragments. This is a bee with deformed wing virus. So the young nurse bee or baby bee that just emerged, and that bee's wings are shot. Here's another one. They call it wrinkled wing or deformed wing. Here's a drone as an adult, and just a bunch of these little nymphs sucking the blood out of them and spreading viruses. So when we put these bees in the washer and we wash them, you can kind of quantify to some degree what's going on in your beehive. Here's some more. You can see this is a sticky board where we actually put a miticide in the colony and went back 3 or 4 days later, pulled the sticky boards, and you can see there's just all these dark little Varroa mites all over this board. Okay, that's another way to try to quantify what's going on. Any type of pupa is a great place to look just to see. If you see them there, then you got a problem, just like the rats and the roaches. If you're looking at drone pupa that's in the burr comb, when you break apart your supers to examine the colony, you're never seeing any Varroa, that's a good sign compared to if you're seeing Varroa in all that pupa. But it still doesn't mean that they're low enough level not to have an impact on your beekeeping. This was a picture I took of a swarm that a guy hived, and I took this shot of these mites. It was about a month and a half after he had put the swarm into a beehive. There's so many mites that you can actually see them through the new comb into the next cell, the thinness of the comb. And so that tells me that these mites came with the swarm and ended up, as soon as they made combs, she started laying drones, they were attracted there and started reproducing right away. Because that's the goal of a Varroa mite, is to reproduce. Alcohol wash, these are the main components of it. This is a half cup scoop or a quarter cup scoop. This is a wash basin to collect the sample. And this is the alcohol washer with about 2 cups, cup and a half of alcohol. And this is like 2 peanut butter jars with a screen in between the 2 halves. Okay. I think Justin's going to share this presentation with you guys if you're interested. And I put a link on there to a video that explains how to do it and why we do it the way we do it, so that there's consistency. And you can check that out. And it's about 7 minutes long and see exactly how to do an alcohol wash, the best way to collect the bees, and with causing them the least amount of stress. But these are the main components, and we're going to collect a half a cup of bees, wash them. That's about 300 bees, and we're going to wash them for about 30 seconds, and then we're going to count the mites that come off in the wash. Who do we want to test? We want to test adult bees off of open brood. Adult bees off of open brood. We don't want to take the queen, obviously. We don't take bees off of honey. We don't take bees off of the clustered beard in the front of the hive on a hot night. We don't take them off of the inner cover. We take the bees off of open brood. And the reason we do that is because open brood is where Varroa mites like to hang out. They came out of a brood cell, or they get ready to go back to a brood cell. And we know that they're attracted to drone brood, and they're just attracted to brood in general because that's where they need to be in order to reproduce. So we're going to collect 300 bees, wash them for about 30 seconds. And if we divide the number of mites by 3, we'll get a percentage. Very important to monitor. What is an acceptable level? Everyone that used to come to New Jersey and give a presentation, I asked them that. Because back 10, 15 years ago, people used to when their levels above their quote-unquote threshold. So the interesting thing was everybody I would ask had a different opinion. And I'm just going to tell you what Tim Schuler says. Tim Schuler says that if I get 0 out of 100 bees on an alcohol wash, I feel pretty good. If I get 1 to 2 out of 100 bees per 100 bees, then Justin, I just lost flies. Then I don't feel really all that good. And if I get any much more than that, I'm really feeling bad. Okay?
Hold on, I'll get that back for you.
Yeah, no problem. So, very good. I can move us to where we need to be. We're just trying to get a percentage. A lot of commercial beekeepers just try to wash a half a cup of bees, and they'll just give you the total number of what they got in the wash. I kind of like to put it in a percentage. It helps me keep things straight. 10 or more per 100, the colony is in really bad shape. You do not want the mite population to get ahead of you. Once the Varroa population in your colony gets ahead of you, it's very hard to get them back under control. And if at all possible, and I bolded this, you want to keep below detectable levels if it's possible. You want to keep those levels low. People quote unquote save the bees. There was even a bee club in South Jersey called Save.
Tim, you're going in and out. Can't really hear you.
You can't hear me?
Now we can hear you. You went out there for about 10 seconds.
Okay. If you want to be a good beekeeper, you got to be a good mite manager. Okay. You won't find Varroa if you don't look for them. And everyone should treat their bees for Varroa mites, but once a year is not enough. You're probably going to be doing it 3 and 4 times a year as the opportunity arises based on your management and the time of the year and what your honey crop is doing. You're going to want to hit them as many times as you can with different controls or treatments so that we don't develop resistance. You need to understand the proper use of each treatment. And the only way you're going to do this is read the directions. And I say it every time I speak on this topic. The directions, if you're my age, you're going to need a magnifying glass because the font is too small. Or look them up online and read it online. But it's important that you refresh your mind each year with what the do's and don'ts are of applying different miticides. These treatments are effective to one degree or another. None of them are in the 95 percentile, I would say. Okay? They are different controls that have their pros and cons at different times of the year, and you're going to need them in your toolbox to use when appropriate to keep your mite levels low and to protect yourselves against resistance developing in your mite population to any of these treatments. Okay? I hope you guys can understand that. And just got this slide, I want you to understand that those top guard and oxalic acid vaporization, these two are most effective when there's no brood in the colony. And from my they are what I use to clean up the colonies just before.
Tim, you're going in and out again. We're having a hard time hearing you.
I don't know what I can do on my end to remedy that.
Still not good. That was better.
Okay, resistance management, very important so that we don't lose tools in our toolbox. Apiguard is a phenol gel formulation we've used for many years. And good thing about this from my perspective, and it works good in hot, humid summer weather. Okay, the temperatures can be almost up to 95 degrees, 100 degrees, and this won't really hurt the colony very bad. It's under control. For me, it's a good control measure to be employed in July, early August, once the honey crop is removed. Apply 2 doses of Apiguard 2 weeks apart, and make sure that if you use screen bottom boards, they're closed. And yeah, follow the directions on it. You're going to need a rim on top, spacer rim, and that Apiguard will need to be put in there. It's very common to have the bees propolis it and put a lot of propolis in that area because they really don't like the smell of it. It will be good. It's a good thing to use when the weather is very hot, as opposed to some formic acid that you really can't use when the weather is very hot because it's very harmful. That's Apiguard. Another one is this either Mite Away Quick Strip or Formic Pro. I think most people would be buying and using Formic Pro now. It's much more stable and much more of a slower release than the old Mite Away Quick Strip. Once again, I can't stress enough how important it is to read the directions, because I've had beekeepers think that each package only had 1 strip, and they actually applied double doses and halfway killed their colonies of bees because they were over applied the treatment. I would say you'd want your temperatures below 80 degrees. I would also recommend that, we've just had a little bout of cool weather here in South Jersey, and this was a perfect time to put a Formic Pro treatment on. Our daytime temperatures were in the upper 70s, low 80s, but it cooled right back off to the upper 60s, low 70s at night. And that's really kind of good weather for formic acid. Another couple tips: put it on towards the end of the day. Put it on the day before a rainy day. Put the pads in the freezer before you apply it. And those are the ways to slow down the release, especially during the first day it's on the bees. Where the bees are pushed out. That'll last for a couple days. Here's a shot of the Pro. 2 options, and one is to put 2 strips in the brood nest for 14 days. Another one is 1 strip for 10 days, and then a second strip for another 10 days. I think that if you watch the weather in your area, you would just be able to do the 2 strips for 14 days, as long as those first 3 days or so, 3 or 4 days, keep the temperature in the mid 70s. It would be really optimal. When you apply this, you're going to want to make sure that you use proper PPE, that's personal protective equipment, and that will all be explained to you on the label. Really, you want your eyes protected, your hands protected, and your lungs protected. Those are the 3 things that need protection when it comes to some of these acid types of treatment. This is Ecolite VAR. This has been around for a long time, and it can be pretty effective. What most keepers don't like about this is it requires 3 treatments 10 days apart. So it's extra work. You can see that lower right-hand slide, here's a piece of the wafer in the corner of the brood, and you're going to want to put these small pieces on all 4 corners. And the other key to this is they can't really be on when honey supers are on. You want to make sure that your honey crop is harvested and you're just getting your bees treated and beginning your winter preparations. Chemicals. They're all temperature dependent. If the temperature is too high, some of them can be detrimental to the bees. If they're too low, the temperature is too low, they don't work that well. They all required screen bottom boards to be closed if you use them. Apiguard and Apolite VAR, the honey must be removed. All three of them can shut down brood production. They can kill bees and brood. And you need to be careful, watch the weather, and use your personal gear. Controls or treatments. Paper script came out in 2013, got approved for use. And this took us back to the days when there was no Varroa mites, because these things were so highly effective. And I hardly ever saw mites in my colonies when it first came out. So the treatment level is 1 script per 5 frames of bees. Note, 5 frames of bees, not brood. Okay, bees. Honeysuckers cannot be on. Temperature is not a problem. This is one of the things I like about it. The temperature and humidity don't really seem to be an issue with Apivar strips. And the treatment time is 6 weeks. That allows for plenty of brood cycles to come through. And as those mites emerge out of the cell, they get exposed to pesticide and ends up paralyzing them, and they start to so it's got to be out 10 days before hay supers are added. Once again, you got to use gloves. Screen bottom boards have no effect on it. And the common mistake that beekeepers would make is there's 10 strips to a pack. The beekeeper only needed 4 or 5, and they ended up saving those strips till the following year. But once the foil pack is open, the deadline or the useful life of this treatment begins to count down. And it's really only good for 60 or 70 days after the foil package has been opened. So you don't want to save open packages. You want to make sure you use them up as quickly as you can once you open them. The other common thing beekeepers do direction is they put them at the end of the frame instead of in the middle of the frame, as you can see in this slide we're looking at now. And as the temperatures get cold, they would have this strip in, but there'd be no bees walking across it. This is a contact pesticide and will only be effective if the honeybees walk across that strip and track it around the hive. So that was a reason that sometimes it wasn't working very well. That was one of the reasons. I like using the pre-punched hole so the strip hangs right between the frames. And then it's not effective as it was when we first started using it in 2014. So that's a positive effect. Question is some resistance testing shows there is some degree of resistance within the Varroa mite population to Apivar, but in other instances of poor performance, Apivar shows no resistance. The Varroa shows no resistance to the Apivar. Sometimes poor performance is due to user error. So poor placement or not repositioning the strips as the cluster changes, using old strips. Some areas of the country, they noticed the strips would get heavily propolized, and they weren't working very well when those strips were scraped to get the propolis off. Worked very well. And then the other thing would be low dose. People not putting the correct number of strips in. And I've seen commercial guys do this where they're trying to save a little bit of money And instead of putting 4 strips in a double deep, they'll put 3 strips in a double deep. If anything, I would recommend you give them extra, not less, of the dose. So, for instance, you have 2 colonies, you need 8 strips, got a 10-strip pack. I'd put an extra strip in each colony. That would be a much better way to use it effectively. It's not going to hurt the bees, and it will do a better job of controlling. Oxalic acid, there's 2 ways to apply it. One is to dribble it in oxalic acid dissolved in sugar syrup, dribbled between the frames, about 5 mLs between each frame. The bees get wet. Not that exact, but you can get good efficacy or control, especially applicable to nucleuses, mating nukes, and swarms. Most of those other treatments we talked about would be too much for them. But this is a good application for oxalic acid dribble. Can you guys still hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. Vaporization. Vaporization is a good way to go when the colony is broodless. Temperature can be important there, and the amount of brood in a colony is important. If it's too cold when you apply it and the cluster is too tight, then you're not going to get your vapor to penetrate the cluster very well, and you won't get good control. In my opinion, in New Jersey, right around Thanksgiving time would be generally a good time to do oxalic acid vaporization. There's very little brood then, and there is so there's very few places for them to hide, and the cluster is not so tight that you don't get good penetration with the vaporized oxalic acid. But I can't stress enough that number 3 point, personal protective equipment, very important. You do not want to breathe in vaporized oxalic acid, and you don't want to get it in your eyes. So, having gloves, having goggles, having a respirator are all very important when you're doing applying vaporized oxalic acid. I was consulting with a friend in the South, and he had bought good colonies, and we were really vaporizing them. We could take infested colonies and really get their levels extremely low with just 2 doses of oxalic acid vaporization. We'd get them so we were alcohol washing 0 on a regular basis. Another shot is pull back very quick. Let me see. Here you can see we have the doses. I have the doses.
Tim, you're breaking up again. We're having trouble hearing you.
Okay. How about now?
That's much better.
Once we, you can see on top of those lids is the next dose for the hives on the other side. And once you're done vaporizing one, you just pop the doser off the top of the machine, put the new one on, turn it upside down, insert it in the entrance. And I mean, it goes very, very quickly. You just need a long extension cord, and if you're running off a generator, to be able to get to as many colonies as quickly as you can. There's another shot of a single. So the question arose with this friend of mine, how many, a strong colony treated twice with oxalic acid, washing 0 mites, how many mites are still in that colony that washes 0s? That was something we never really heard anybody study, but it was something we thought was interesting to know. And so he gave me 3 whole hives that ranked number ones, colonies that were very strong, occupying 2 deeps. How many mites are still in a colony that washes zeros? So I killed those 3 whole hives and washed every bee in them. And it averaged between 200 to 300 Varroa still in colonies that were washing zeros after 2 oxalic acid treatments. And granted, it's only 3 hives, but there's still plenty of mites in there. And you can see how next spring, when that colony starts raising brood, you can see that the mite levels are going to just increase as those mites are reproducing. This is a shot of the whole hive watch. Here's a bucket with the dead bee. Yes.
Can I just ask a question about that? Was that a treatment? Was this experiment done when the bees were essentially broodless, like around Thanksgiving?
Yes.
So even with no brood, there were still several hundred Varroa mites left in that colony.
Even with no brood and 2 oxalic acid vaporization treatments, there were still that many Varroa mites in those colonies.
How far apart were the vaporization treatments done?
Only
Timing.
about 5 to 6 days.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You were under a time constraint, i.e. traveling away from home. So a lot of counting, a lot of washing. My arm was very tired of washing by the time I was done that project. But that's the only way you learn some stuff. So mite control strategies, okay? Apivar used to do a great job. I would say when it first came out, it was 99% effective. And I used it for the major part of my Varroa control. But there were rumors of resistance then where we were seeing inconsistent results between 2018 and 2020. And because of all that stuff, my advice is to use as many treatments as you can during the year, considering temperature and management. Okay, so when your management system allows it, when you're not on a honey flow, use these different, rotate with Apivar, Apiguard, Apilite Var, Formic Pro, oxalic acid during the same season to help prevent resistance. Okay, by that I mean we don't want to lose any one of those treatments. We want to have them all effective to a pretty good degree. 80% effective would be great, but certainly for it not to get worse than that. And stick nukes, package, treat them with oxalic acid dribble when you cook them. And then I tell people to check a week or 2 after a treatment. So I heard a presentation where a guy said, I think it was Randy Oliver, said in his operation he waits 3 weeks. So there's a total brood cycle go through to check to see how his treatment, what effect it had on the colonies. And then retreat if needed. And if your levels are still high after you do that, after you do it control, then you got to get another one on there. Some interesting statistics, guys, is that 75% of your Varroa mites are in 25% of your colonies. 75% of the Varroa mites in your operation are in 25% of your colonies. And commercial guys would tell me for many years that, they'd have zeros, they'd wash zeros, and then they'd have a 28. And all those colonies were treated the exact same way. Why is that? Why was that? No one has an answer for that. And, I think it was another Randy Oliver presentation I heard where he said that 75% of your mites are in 25% of your colonies. And the way he knows that is him and his sons wash every colony in their operation, which is well over 1,000, several times each year and keep track of it. So they kind of know. and that bears witness with what New Jersey commercial guys have told me over the years. Less than 1 per 100. Consider using Formic Pro in mid-September, or oxalic acid or hop guard in November, December to get the mites missed by Apivar and prevent resistance. Okay. Yeah. And where I live in New Jersey, I'm a big fan. I like to have Apivar in by mid-September to protect me from mid-September to mid-October or early November, and then follow that up with oxalic acid vaporization. And as I already told you, I like using ApiGuard. It's easy to apply. I like putting that on in July once the honey crop comes off. So those are some things that work well for me, that I like doing it that way. Other people do different things, and I'm not opposed to that. Some people like putting Apivar in January sometime, early February. Well, if you just hit them with oxalic acid treatment at Thanksgiving, the mites really haven't had a chance to reproduce by January. So for me, I don't know that it's for me to hit them again at that point. But once that honey comes off, I definitely got to hit them a lot to keep them low. Yeah, I think I'm on.
Tim, you're all broken up now.
Okay, how about that?
Much better.
Okay. You see the two Varroa on the back of that queen? Not good. And this is bad. This is what we want to prevent. And you got to be very vigilant to prevent it. You got to monitor the levels, treat with multiple treatments to prevent resistance, monitor to see what effect you have. Don't make assumptions. Don't let levels get high, and that can happen fast. So I'm sorry for the technical difficulties. I can't thank Justin enough for helping me get through it. And I'm sorry you can't hear that good, but hopefully it certainly wasn't a waste of your time and you got something out of this presentation. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them if I could. And if not, certainly thank you for listening.
Yep, we do have questions. Thank you, Tim, first of all. And yes, we could hear you, and the slides were excellent too, and kind of filled in the blanks where, when the audio wasn't all that great. One question I have for you: at certain times of the year, namely fall, waiting 3 weeks to do an alcohol wash after a treatment may put you into a time period where you have reduced options for treatment, and perhaps if the treatment was not effective, and you wait, it may be too late, and you may already have done a great deal of damage to your bees. So what would you suggest in that case?
Well, I think we have to use our heads that time of year, because you're running out of time. Okay. I'm just saying that in order to get a better picture, an optimal picture, if you wait for a whole brood cycle. You don't have the luxury of waiting for that, then by all means do a wash before that. You know what I mean? It's not etched in stone, but when you do have the opportunity to stretch it out, you might get a better picture, Landy, if you could wait that time. But if you can't, I certainly understand that, and those are the decisions that we all have to make, for ourselves.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
You had a question?
Hi, Tim. This is Joe. I'm not too sure how to say this question, but I'm going to try. So I saw a picture in your presentation of deformed wing virus. And my question is, when your bees get deformed wing virus, is it always because of mites, or could it be something else as well?
Well, there's a virus called the deformed wing virus, and
So-
that is generally what causes the deformed wing. Now, you might deformed wing. That could have been in a fight. That could have been something else that.
I lost you. Could you repeat the answer to that question? I lost you.
If it's a young bee that has a shriveled wing, it's the virus. If it's an old bee that has the shriveled wing, it's damaged by some sort of physical damage through manipulating the colony or a fight or something went on. The young bee has a more fuzz to her, and her wings sit flat on her back. The older bee, their wings are more in a V formation, and they seem to be a little less hairy in my mind, and a harder exoskeleton. I'm not aware of anything else that would cause a shriveled wing and when you see this in a colony, Joe, it's not just one. I mean, there might be 100 bees crawling around that their wings are just look like little pieces of string. That is definitely caused by the virus.
So in other words, if you're saying you see 1 or 2 bees with deformed wing virus, and you did a hive inspection, it could be because the bees are old or got in a fight. But if you see a lot of bees with deformed wing virus, most probably it could be because of the mites.
Yes.
I see. Okay.
A lot is a subjective term, Joe. A lot to you might not be a lot, and vice versa.
Okay. Got it. Okay.
Hey, Tim. Hi, it's Charlie.
Hey,
Here's my question. I'm going to put it sort of in the form of a hypothetical. It's midsummer. You've treated with Apivar. You've given them some Formic Pro, and you still have a high mite count. And you say, treat with something else. Well, you can't use Apivar again. Your temperatures are, I guess the sub question is, would you give them another round of Formic Pro? I assume the answer to that is no. And if you're dealing with high mite counts in summer, and you can expect your counts to go higher because that's the nature of the curve, what is your recommended course of treatment at that point?
If my mite levels were high again, I would hit them with Formic Pro again. That'd be, there's
Another
nothing
Formic.
wrong. You put it in place with the same product if that's all the environment will allow you to hit them with.
Okay.
See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I know guys that had high mite levels, like some of those colonies I was telling you that had the really high populations. Well, after a 6-week treatment with Apivar, the levels were still 5 per 100, 6 per 100, down from 25 per 100, right? And I know people that have put another round of Apivar on and gotten the mite levels down to 0.
Okay.
Okay. So, following up back to back one time is not a big deal, but then clean them up using some oxalic acid vaporization once we get to Thanksgiving, because they're not going to really develop a resistance, the mite part, to oxalic acid vaporization.
Where I'm sort of going with this is, what do you do during the during the honey producing season, and which coincides, of course, when it's really warm and you have temperature issues involving some of the treatment. You've answered my question pretty much. As long as you can get around the temperature constraints of using Formic Pro, that Formic Pro seems to be the best treatment to be using between treatments of using Apivar in the early part and the later part of the season before you then give it the cleanup with the oxalic acid. Would you agree with that?
I would, although in the fall, like see where I live, we don't get a fall honey flow. I don't know if you guys do where you're at.
Sometimes yes, sometimes no.
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Well, bees always winter better on honey, and there may be times that instead of getting another harvest, you need to just let them store that for winter feed and get your mite treatment on using something that would be detrimental to the honey. You follow what I'm saying there?
Yes. Yes, I do.
So a
Thanks.
lot of it is kind of reasoning your way through, and sometimes you got to bite the bullet. Many times in the past, beekeepers would not pull their honey in July, and then complain that they had nothing they could treat their bees with because their honey crop was still on. Well, if you get the honey off in July, you have a window where you can treat them with Apiguard or Apolite Var or even Apivar before your fall honey crop comes. So you got to kind of plan the timing out, and know your limitations on your mite treatments, so you can get a knockdown in before the fall nectar flow starts. Does that make sense?
Hi, Tim. My name is Jim, and I have a question. Pretty much like, what about the bees themselves? I always get bee magazines, and they advertise hygienic bees, eat mites, or Russian bees, or Saskatraz. I mean, does it matter the race or the breed or whatever you want to call it of the bee itself?
Well, there are some. I'm not aware of any of the races that can live successfully and be productive without some sort of mite control from a beekeeper. So for me, it doesn't really matter what the race is.
So that's pretty much just like advertisement. They're all pretty much the same across the board, really.
I think some people are trying to breed a degree of resistance in, but the problem is that queen bees are very loose in their sexual orientations, right? And they mate with whoever's flying around. And so you're really difficult to control and get a mating the way a beekeeper wants it to be, to try to maintain that level of resistance within an operation.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
What I wanted to say is that even this is Adriana. So what I wanted to say is that even in the heat of summer, there's always 3 days that are the right temperature to do Formic Pro. So we just need to monitor the calendar and the weather forecast.
Okay. Was that a statement or a question?
No, I think I was wondering if you agree with that. I noticed that there's always time when you can apply Formic Pro, even if it's summer.
I would say that there probably are days, Adriana, but life gets in the way of a beekeeper's best intentions. So, yeah, maybe that's true. I wouldn't disagree with it, but I'm not going to say, there might only be 3 days that are that way, so everybody just can't do it,
Thank you, Tim. This is another Joe in the Beekeeping Club. I have a question for you. But first, thanks for speaking to us tonight.
Sure.
My question for you, Tim, is this year, for the first year, I'm experimenting with 3D nests, really large beehives, large populations. And I'm assuming that soon that's going to mean really high Varroa mite populations too. And I was wondering if you've had any hands-on experience or any useful hearsay or rumors on what kind of situation I might expect in a month or so.
Well, I'm going to tell you something. We know that I know that the colonies that die over the winter are oftentimes the beekeepers' best producers the previous season. And in large part, I believe that's because their mite production is off the chart as their brood production is off the chart. And I've discussed this with some of my commercial guys, and really that's one of the reasons a lot of commercial beekeepers run a single brood chamber and honey supers, is so they can control to some degree the amount of brood, so that they're not like the mites are not reproducing and getting so far ahead of them during the honey season that they're darn near impossible to control once the honey comes off. So I can remember 10 or 12 years ago, people telling me that 3 deeps is the way of the future and you never have to treat if you use 3 deeps. And there were certain people that were real strong proponent of these. And then all of a sudden, we never heard another peep from those people. And you hear through the grapevine they lost their bees. So I would tell you to be on guard, because you're going to have a battle if you're running 3 brood chambers and they have brood from top to bottom in those 3 brood chambers. And the sooner you get on your mite control, the better off you're going to be.
All right, thank you.
Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it does. And it basically sounds like if I were to pursue this, I need to start testing for mites sooner than later.
You're absolutely right. And you know what? Don't wait till the honey flow's over. Get your honey pooled and start treating, so you can make sure you're ahead of the mite population. Because you saw that graph in my presentation. The mites are trailing by about a month behind the bee population, right?
Yeah. About a month.
So for you running 3 brood chambers, you're going to need to be on top of it, really well. And it's really, this is a good topic at this stage, because you're coming into the time where you're going to want to really be vigilant.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Tim, I think you've answered pretty much everybody's question.
Well, I hope so. I'm glad to have been able to help, and I'm glad you had some good questions. And the thing I guess a parting comment I would make is that, a couple of years ago at the state beekeepers meeting, I had a beekeeper trying to call me out on the fact that my recommendations had changed from the previous couple years. And the reason that my recommendations changed, or my position changed, was because I learned new things, or I've observed new things from when I had my last position. Because quite frankly, guys, I'm learning just like you're learning. And we have to make good observations, and we have to make adjustments, and we can't make assumptions. Assumptions get nobody in the bee business but out of the bee business. You got to know what's going on. You got to see what's going on. You got to be doing those washes so you know what's going on. Otherwise, you're beekeeping kind of blindfolded, if you will. And mites change a lot of stuff, and Varroa mites humble beekeepers in a big way. And, you know, I just want you to be on guard because that's what we all need to be in order to really manage these parasites well. So then we can manage our bees well.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you for joining us tonight. I think everybody's clapping. I don't know if you can hear them. Thank you so much. Say hi to Patty and have a great evening.
I will, and thank you all very much, and you guys do the same.
Good night.
Bye-bye.